Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Anthony Mills. I am the Executive Director of GI&I, Global Innovation Institute. It's an honor to have you here with us. As most of you know, GI&I is the world's leading professional certification, business accreditation, and membership organization in the field of innovation, very active globally all over the world with authorized providers, delivering our training and assessments, and with professionals certified all over the world. Once a month, we do the monthly webinar series. This is our June 2024 webinar, and I just want to welcome you all here with us as we work together and continue our ongoing journey of learning about innovation, transformation, and the role that innovation plays in different areas. Like today, we'll be talking about social change. So what I want to do now is to introduce our guest to you. And after that, we're going to really kind of dive into more of a conversational discussion. So in terms of our guest today is Mr. Paul Klein. Paul is a global thought leader, social change entrepreneur, and recognized author. In 2001, Paul founded Impact, a B Corp that has helped corporations around the world understand their purpose and benefit from helping to solve our world's key social issues. This has included such organizations as Cadillac Fairview, De Beers, Goldcorp, Home Depot, John Deere, McCain Foods, Nestle, Petro-Canada, Pfizer, Scotiabank, Sobeys, Starbucks, TD, Walmart, and 3M. Paul is also the founder of the Impact Foundation for Social Change, a charitable organization that builds pathways to employment for newcomers and refugees. Paul has written extensively about business and social change for various publications, including Forbes, The Guardian, the LSE Business Review, and the Stanford Social Innovation Review. Paul also serves on the advisory council of several social change-oriented organizations, including, amongst others, the Center of Excellence in Responsible Business at the Schulich School of Business at York University in Toronto. Paul's book, Change for Good, an action-oriented approach for business to benefit from solving the world's most urgent social problems, was published in 2022 by ECW Press. Today, Paul and I are going to be talking together about Change for Good. What we're finding here is that the role of business in society is changing rapidly, and employees, customers, and shareholders all now expect organizations in the private sector to be making the world a better place in addition to making a profit. Consequently, the opportunities for businesses to harness social change in ways that help to improve their reputation, build brand equity, and grow their bottom line are in fact growing exponentially. At the same time, however, the bar for ethical behavior and authentic action has never been higher, such that if businesses do not take these matters seriously, they risk being targeted for greenwashing and impact washing. So Paul will be sharing with us some of his personal experiences in helping these Fortune 500 companies that we mentioned benefit from helping to solve our urgent social problems. And this is very important for us today because all of us are being challenged to seek out and find innovative new ways of addressing and solving these pressing social matters. So with that, let us start by welcoming Paul Klein. Paul, welcome to our webinar today.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It's such a pleasure to be here and with everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to it.
Yes, me too. So what I'd like to do now is to lead Paul and I through a conversation with several key questions, drawing from Paul's rich set of personal experiences. So to begin, Paul, my first question is the following. More and more, businesses seem to understand that being socially and environmentally responsible is important today. But on the other hand, organizations are, I believe, increasingly nervous about taking too much of a stand on an issue for fear of social media backlash. Can you tell us what you're seeing with your clients and other organizations in this regard? How are they approaching making a difference in this very complex environment?
Well, it's not easy, arguably it's getting more difficult in a lot of ways, because there's a couple things that are happening. You've got social media amplifying everything, of course. You've got an increasing, politicization and polarization of issues and audiences. So, yeah, I feel like in some ways in the past it was sort of simpler, you know, because there was maybe on the one hand, not as much risk. Also, there wasn't as much opportunity. So this is we're caught in this time when the opportunity when people we are working with in other corporations, I believe, see more than ever that they ought to be doing more in this space, and that there's a bit of nervousness because what happens, and so if you're a corporation taking a stand on some issue which is highly polarized, and just to use it, among many examples, whether it's abortion or immigration or many other things, that you know that some of your employees and some of your customers may support one side of that and some may support the other side of that. So I think that people wrestle with this sort of impossible calculus to try and figure out, okay, what's the place for us here, you know? So I think that that's just has become a defining thing. Like just the other day, one of the organizations we with who's supporting Pride Month, which is Pride Month in June, I believe, and is got a lot of backlash for supporting Pride Month from folks in the LGBTQ plus community who are, who are saying that this is maybe what they're doing is not as authentic as it should be. So well, it becomes all those things like how do you know like what is authentic? What is the thing that's going to resonate most? How do you kind of and is it even possible to make everybody happy in a situation like this? I'm not. I don't actually think that's true. So there's all kinds of tension there. Um, yeah, it's not new. We used to see this, this is some time ago. Just made me think about Starbucks when Howard Schultz was the CEO and he came out in support of gay marriage and a highly polarized issue. But I thought that it's a really good example because what he did is he had shareholders who were saying, you know what, you support gay marriage and we're pulling out of Starbucks, and he said, you can do what you want. This is what we're committed to this as a company. And so he very much stood for his own values and the values of Starbucks, in spite of it
Mhm.
potentially being, from a business point of view, in terms of shareholders, something that wasn't maybe in their best interest, you know?
Well, along that same line, though, um, obviously that was Howard's values and views and so forth. But
Mm.
if a business is taking a position like that, are they disrespecting the other views? I mean, there are other different and often divergent religious and moral views about things like that. Those people would believe that their views are equally valid. And are they disrespecting the people who have those alternative views that may not align with their own? How do they deal with that?
Sometimes it's true. I think that is
Yeah.
true sometimes, or sometimes depends either side. It could be
Yeah.
alienating or disenfranchising or whatever you want to call it. Folks who don't agree. But I think that to me, it's just I think it's like anything now. Like all you
Yeah.
can do is have a longer horizon to this and say, okay, all we can do is stand up for what matters to us, what our value set is, stand up for human rights as we believe they are. And there's the International Declaration of Human Rights as one way to look at things, which I would 100% support, and have a view that, yeah, two things. And again, the calculus is impossible, right? But
Mhm.
arguably, you know, and probably realistically today, people will lose some support, if they're taking a
Yeah.
stand too hard. But at the same time, I think they'll also contribute and build loyalty among their employees, among customers and others in a way that they might not have otherwise. So I tend to look at kind of an optimist. So I tend to look at that as
Yeah.
being the opportunity and say, okay, well, here is our chance to really strengthen relationships with the people that matter most.
Right. Well, again, that last part is the people who matter most, if that's what their values are. I mean, you
Hmm.
obviously want an organization to be true to their values, whatever they are. And there are organizations that have different values, like, for example, Chick-fil-A or Hobby Lobby, they have different values. And obviously they want to be true to whatever their values are. But, I guess my perception is there's some issues that everyone sort of agrees on, like, equal access to education for everyone in the world, in general, women's rights and so forth. So everyone tends to agree, like, these are good causes to support. Whereas there's this other set of issues that are highly polarized, and there's two very divergent views on them that are at odds with each other. And so with this first set, like, yeah, we can support those, and everyone's probably going to be happy. But this other set, if we pick, we're gonna have to pick a side. We're going to find favor with one side and alienate the other side. Um,
Hmm.
do you find organizations trying to steer more toward the non-polarizing issues and avoid the polarizing issues, or not?
Yeah, for sure. And in the in sort of in what often happens is people try to carve out a place in the middle, right? So this
Okay.
is, saying, okay, well, what can we do that's going to be generally acceptable to everybody and
Mhm.
not piss off too many people, on the other hand. And so, but it's a hard place to be. I personally think that's a hard uh, I don't think that's the best strategy because I think that what
Okay.
it ends up doing is becomes one of those things like a sort of a checkbox activity where they're saying, well, we now know that all kinds of stakeholders, whether that's employees or shareholders or customers or consumers, now expect corporations and brands to be taking a stand, so to speak, on something, right? So that is conclusive. That is what people are expecting. Uh, but what happens is in this context that we're talking about, so stuff happens like you just described, and it's sort of like a checkbox, So
Hmm.
we've done something, but I would argue that the business and social value of doing in this space is actually taking action. It's more than just some kind of vanilla, middle of the road, don't offend anybody kind of strategy. Yes, that's something you can point to and say, yes, we're doing this thing. But
Hmm.
the question is, and the question we always ask is, what is the value of whatever it is that they're doing to the company? What is the value to the world at large or their specific communities? And ultimately it has to be both. And we believe, I mean, what we always say is that business is good for social change is good for business. It goes together. But that also, like what I said, is social change. That means there has to be a change. You have to actually be moving the needle in some way. And that is not doing something which is sort of performative, which is just saying you're committed to something or doing something in a way which isn't really that meaningful, I'd say, you know. So actually, just last night I was at this a dinner, and there was that chairman of one of the largest maybe it's the largest law firm in Canada. I'm not sure, or it's a large law firm anyway. And he was saying, what they're doing really well is prioritizing diversity in their materials. They got policies.
Okay.
Hiring is great. It's become more diverse. What they're failing at is actually doing the work internally to make sure these more diverse, I guess, younger lawyers are actually staying there. Very high degree of turnover because what's happening beyond their ability to communicate and attract people internally
Hmm.
isn't good enough.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I thought it was a great example.
So yeah, it was. And so Barbara in our audience kind of chimed in with the comment and a question, because Barbara has a long history in consumer packaged goods, and she worked at Mars and so forth. And so she's kind of asking this question, framing things a little bit for us. Do consumers really want or need political views in their CPG products? For example, if one wants to have a snack, do they need to know the politics of each person in the supply chain and the maker of the snack? Can a snack just be a snack? Uh, and she says also, I'd like more CPG companies just to be generally supportive of their communities, making sure that our friends and neighbors have affordable housing, food, heating, etc., in their communities. So feel free to comment on that and Barbara's question.
Well, Barbara, it's a great question. I love it. Can a snack just be a snack? I guess that depends on who it is. Depends on the snack too, right? Because there's a whole other thing too. I mean, we work for CPG companies, and like some of them, one of the things that many people would say, forgetting about all of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of social change programs, is it healthy food? And I think that's probably the starting point for these folks, and very often it isn't, or they're trying to make it healthier. But yeah, I don't think, like, I think kind of what you said, Anthony, like, I feel like what people are looking for mostly is this company or brand, in this case, contributing to making the world a better place in some way, in some ways, like I think that's how I
Right.
think about it. And so you can
Yes.
politicize anything, right? And there's a gazillion points of view on everything, but at that level, are they treating people fairly? Are they buying and sourcing products fairly and responsibly? Are they doing
Mm-hmm.
everything they can do to minimize their impact on the environment? So call it whatever you want. Call it social responsibility, ESG, CSR, pick the acronym. It doesn't really matter. But it's at that level.
Yeah.
And what I believe is that in this case, to Barbara, to your question, in terms of these kinds of companies, I think that there is something. I don't think most have gotten there yet, but I do believe that the opportunity for businesses in the CPG space is to, when someone is actually purchasing something, is to, in the minds of the consumer, to think, okay, there's something meaningful here, you know,
Yeah.
so it's actually more than just a snack, So I think that's how I would look at it. And you look at, I don't know, like, just showing a good example, Chobani yogurt,
Yeah.
is an amazing example. So here's a yogurt company. It's enormous, but they have an incredible commitment to supporting refugees and creating jobs for
Right.
refugees.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't pinpoint how many people their consumers know that, but I bet quite a few do. They're working with their suppliers around the world to make sure they hire refugees. They're working with an amazing organization, I believe it's called the Tent Partnership for Refugees, to ensure that more of their suppliers are hiring refugees, and they've had themselves and I think within their supply chain. I mean, I think it's more than 1,000 refugees have been hired in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously, at the most basic level, if you were a newcomer, refugee or a newcomer, and you knew that, I think that would be a very compelling thing. And for many other people,
Absolutely.
goes to saying, okay, well, these people don't have to do this. Like
Right.
this isn't,
Absolutely.
and I
Yeah.
think that's another way we like to look at it at impact, which is that another way to kind of assess some of this stuff in terms of its authenticity, call it that,
Right.
is some
Right.
of the best
Absolutely.
things happen or appear to us as being not necessarily in the best interests of the company or the brand. So when you see a company who's doing something that they don't have to do, or that it actually appears that maybe that's counterintuitive to business, that becomes a very believable act of responsibility, for lack
Yeah.
of a better description, right? So,
Absolutely.
it's like
Yeah.
Yves Chouinard giving all his shares in Patagonia to their
Mm-hmm.
foundation, literally gave up everything, all his ownership,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
Patagonia.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, so many examples of that.
Y- Yeah, no, but I wanted to circle back a little bit to something you said earlier, where you said in passing was that, supporting, I guess, causes that matter to their customer,
Hmm.
which kind of brings to my mind the whole idea of market segmentation and profiling that market segment, understanding that market segment. And if we have a certain type of customer who tends to buy our product, really getting in tune with what matters, what their values are. I mean, because I think a lot of people respect like what Ben and Jerry's has been doing over many years, right? Especially when they first started. And I think the customers who bought Ben and Jerry's really resonated with that. It agreed with their values, right? But then you have times where the leaders and organizations might take a stand on something that doesn't resonate with who their target, their main customer is. I mean, we saw that a year ago with Anheuser-Busch and
Right.
Target.
Hmm.
They kind of took positions, meaningfully or not, that were actually the opposite of their primary customer, and their primary customer responded negatively. Um, so I guess my question is kind of bring this around. Do organizations actually put a lot of thought into profiling their main customer and trying to make sure the positions they take resonate with that customer as opposed to dissonate with that customer?
Clearly they don't. I would say not enough,
Well, I think maybe
you
some
know.
do, some don't. I don't know
Yeah,
what your
yeah,
experience has
no.
been.
Well, like you see some remarkably stupid things, like some of those
Yeah.
things, like, and also like where is it that, like some of the stuff happens, I think, in the name of branding, communications, and so on, without actually
Mhm.
going deeper and thinking, well, what are the implications for us in taking a stand on something here, And the other thing is that, and this is our approach at Impact, quite frankly, is the most basic thing. Like if you're going to take a stand, if you're going to commit to something, you have to do that through the lens and with the participation, co-creation of the folks who you're actually trying to do something for on behalf of. So
Mhm.
that's part of it, right? And so lots of decisions get made in boardrooms by people who have no understanding whatsoever of what these issues are or what the consequences of taking a position could be. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's just there's a remarkable again these things become, I think, I don't know what the right word is. It's sort of beyond perform. It's like, and you see this right now. It's of course, as I said before, in Pride Month, there's so much of this, and I think that Anheuser-Busch example was during Pride Month before, and
It
so
was
it's
a year
it's a
ago.
sort of bandwagon, effect,
Mhm.
where people feel the need to do something, and then in situations like that come out looking to some people, including me, even worse because it's like, well, where do these people stand on this stuff anyway? It's clear that they don't, you know. As an organization, it appears that
Yeah.
what they stand for is making sure that their consumers are happy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess, if I was on the board of directors, I'd always ask any position like, how does this resonate with all of our stakeholders? Our those communities we want to support, our customers, our investors. It's called we call it stakeholder management. Like, how
Mm-hmm.
do we manage all of our stakeholders? How do we make sure that what we're doing resonates well with all of our stakeholders and not necessarily alienate one? I mean, again, it's sometimes, like you said, it's the impossible calculus. But I think that's the question they should be asking is like, have we empathetically considered the viewpoint of all of our stakeholders, customers and so forth? But it seems to be the challenge partly.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's like, and in order to do what you just said, you do need to go deeper. You
Yeah.
need to actually put more thought into this and to actually consider these different stakeholders, consider the issues themselves, consider
Hmm.
the competitive context and who else is doing things,
Hmm.
consider
Hmm.
what often the starting point, not always, but often I would say is what is deeply meaningful and important to employees as a starting point.
Well, yeah,
This
yeah.
I've been involved in creating many programs where that was the starting point, and
Ah.
ultimately it was important to people. And then there's other things like just come to mind that are maybe a little more um, broader, I would say, that I don't think, like Microsoft is like, I don't know if people know about this, but I think it's really an amazing Microsoft program, which is their commitment to diversity and commitment to gaining data for about diversity issues. And then, and I think they're working with the World Bank, and they're, collecting data on a
Hmm.
very large scale, and they're sharing this, I think, in a kind of an open source way with anybody who wants to know, about the data related to people with disabilities, how that is influencing or needs to influence policy and various kinds of programs. So it's a good example, I would say, of a very large brand going deep on a particular issue,
Hmm.
and then I think communicating that well, and then, but I don't think it's an issue that, and I have no idea where this was created with Microsoft, but doesn't seem like that's an issue that people are going to have a problem with either, you know?
Right. Yeah, I don't think so. Again, I think there's some of these issues that are just universally agreed upon that we all can get behind those things without any polarizing issues, which is great. And I like that idea too. Like you said, some of the organizations, the starting point was the employees. So I presume they go out and survey the employees to learn more about what they truly value and how we can integrate that into our CSR efforts and really reflect our employee base and what's important to them. So I think that's a great idea. But that being said, I want to shift gears a little bit and kind of get more into the subject that probably our audience here is very, very keen to learn about. And that is specifically, what does innovation look like in this space? Give us some examples of businesses that are truly changing the games in terms of how they approach making the world a better place. We want to hear about real innovation.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I can just think of some examples that we've been involved in and some others as well. And of course, fundamentally, and I think you and I spoke about this before, innovation does mean doing something differently. Like fundamentally, you have to make change, and so that is it's a few pieces to it, just some examples that I think are good. Some that we've been involved with, maybe, and some of others that I think are good. Um, and actually one that just in the CPG space as well that I'd forgotten about before. An organization we've done a lot of work for is McCain Foods globally, and
Hmm.
it's the largest, I think, grower and supplier of potato related products. And so they, related to their purpose as an organization, we helped develop this idea called the future of farming. And so what does that look like? It turns out the future of farming has actually manifested itself in, quote, farms of the future. So this is a commitment that's not a commitment. This is an initiative this immense company has, where they are literally starting farms that are sort of high-tech centers of regenerative agriculture. And the first one was in Canada, the second one was South Africa. And they're going, I think ultimately the hope is they're going to be in all their, I think, 7 operating regions around the world. And they're going to share what they find with that and use it for their own, innovation in this space, and to share it with others as well. That's innovation to me,
Hmm.
because it's literally doing something in this space, in this case, in the space of food and agriculture, that has never been done before. Like that's a big deal. And so I think that's a great example. Um, Another example I could think of is Home Depot, I would say, in its own way, has done incredible work and been innovative in the sense their innovation comes from a genuine belief in contributing to solving social problems. So again, unlike some other things, like here in the United States, they've done a huge amount of supporting their commitment to ending homelessness for veterans. Here it's
Hmm.
ending homelessness for youth. And so that's a very big difference to say, okay, we're not supporting this issue. We are helping to, and our whole orientation is to end this problem. That's a social, in this space, where corporations are kind of like, well, should we do this? Should we not do this? Or what do we say? And,
Hmm.
that's a
Hmm.
pretty bold thing. I was in the room here when the folks in Home Depot Canada, with the president of Home Depot Canada, and after exploring this issue in a really in-depth way, including getting a huge amount of input from youth who've been homeless themselves, made this recommendation to the CEO of Home Depot, saying, you know what, we believe that we could stand for ending youth homelessness. And he said, well, that's a big thing, but that's, like, we like challenges, and that's what we're going to do. So
Yeah,
that
I think it's an important
something.
distinction
So
because I noticed that in your book that you made the point that there's a difference between organizations just throwing money at causes and actually getting actively involved and being a part of the solution. And you mentioned, for example, Ericsson helping
oh
with
yeah.
disaster relief rather than just throwing money at someone's cause, which is often just an endless burn of money, right? It may or may not have impact. But then actually instead of that, just yeah, we may still do that, but we're actually getting involved, hands on, and being a part of the solution, the way that Ericsson did with disaster relief. Like to me, that's a big change in how you approach your whole philosophy around CSR.
Totally. And if that's so great you brought that up, Ben, because it's a few things that are important in that example. And that program is called Ericsson Response, I think. And so what they do is in the context of floods, tornadoes, whatever it is, these terrible disasters around the world, they leverage what they do, which is having, communication systems. So one of the things that happens when problems like that happen, no communications, right? Communications are out, people
Mm-hmm.
can't use their cell phones or whatever. They come in and their team comes in and sets up communications infrastructure in areas where there have been serious disasters. That means that
Mm-hmm.
the Red Cross and other support workers can actually come in, the military, whoever it is, they can get in and do their job and help people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great, I think it's great from a number of points of view, leverages their core capacity as an organization, leverages the ability and skills of people who work there. So you want to talk about
Mm-hmm.
getting employees involved. This is different than sending employees out to pick up garbage in a park somewhere. This is actually not that that's some good things about that too, but this is actually making people feel great, making employees feel great because they're bringing their own skills, knowledge, and so on to help a cause which is really in this case, like incredibly urgent and important.
Mm-hmm.
So I absolutely love that. And so it's not about a donation to some organization. So it's another way to think about it, which is that we always think about this all the time. If you think about asking some company, like, what would it take for a, you know, a news writer or a broadcast person or whoever to do a story about what you have done, your company has done. And what's not going to happen is no one's doing a story for a company making a donation. You know, it's just not going to
Right.
happen. It's like how, yes, it's a good thing, but the and another way to think about it is no one's doing stories about generally about the inputs to these kinds of programs. What people want to know about and what people can get a huge earned media value from is the
Mm-hmm.
outcomes. And in fact, just thinking about innovation, like real innovations, I think real innovation is what is the least you can do to have the most impact in the fastest time. That's innovation. So
Yeah.
what are you going to do
Yeah.
differently?
And I think
You know,
yeah.
and
Well, and
so
like you
that's
said, I mean,
newsworthy.
it is, and when organizations actually just stop thinking, it's all about throwing money at causes and say, how can we actually get involved, and then say, okay, what are the core capabilities and competencies we have, and the resources we have, people, capital, skills, whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
how can we actually apply those to solving a social need,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to running our regular business. They often will immediately recognize opportunities for innovation. Like, okay, no one's doing this over here, but we have the ability to do it, and we have the resources to do it, and it would make an impact. And the moment they start doing that, they're bringing innovation to those situations, and I think that's incredibly impactful. And you're right. This is what we tell every organization. It's not about the inputs, it's about the outputs and actually the outcomes and the impact from those outcomes. And that's how everything needs to be measured. At the end of the day, how much are we moving the needle? What's the impact we're producing? And there's so many ways that organizations can be very innovative about getting involved to produce that impact.
100%, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And the other way that what you said made me think is like if you wanted to be a real rock star in your organization, and whether it's in this area or anything else for that matter, the what is that? Is like you go to the person you report to and say, guess what? I figured out a way for us to have more impact for less money next year.
Hmm.
You know, because what is
That's the rock star.
right? That's the rock star. Oh, this person isn't like everybody else and asking for more money. This person is
Mhm.
being really innovative and saying, I figured out a way for us to have more impact, in this case, say in the community or with respect to a social issue, and be good for our business that's actually going to cost less than we spent last year.
Yep.
That's a big deal.
That's
That's what, as a
it
leader,
is.
that's what you want to hear, right?
It
Sign
is.
me up for
Well,
that.
that that's the impact to investment ratio. Anytime you can increase the actual impact to investment ratio, I mean that's kind of like thinking about value. Anytime you can increase value, you deliver more benefit or you deliver the same benefit at less cost, but you're either way you're increasing the value equation. So it's a similar type of value equation, except in this case we're going to call it social impact.
Mhm.
Social impact relative to the investment, the more we can improve that, the better we are. So
100%.
let me shift gears a little bit. I want to ask you another question. Why did you write this book, Change for Good? And in what ways is this book different from other resources for business leaders?
Well, I wrote it really because of some of the stuff we've talked about already. I was also just thinking about, I don't know, I had the good fortune because I started Impact in 2001, and I just had these crazy experiences, good and bad, over the years that I always thought about and always are kind of helping to shape how we think about doing this work for corporations. And so I just thought, some things that you just can't make certain things up. It's like, so I just thought I wanted to tell those stories, but also to share what what one can learn from those stories, and also provide practical tools for how corporations can quote change for good. Um, and the other two insights that I had, or things I was thinking about for some time. One of them we've talked about before, which is this notion in the book that I called CSR Light, Corporate Social Responsibility Light. And that basically means that corporations who have become very good at doing as little as possible and communicating that very well, to their own advantage. And so, whether it's CSR light or performativism or whatever, there's a whole kind of mini expertise or niche that some corporations and brands have got, which is like doing very little but being seen to do a lot, you know. And then the other
Yeah.
final thing that I wanted to share was, and I referenced this before, which is our belief in the importance of involving people with lived experience in developing programs, social change programs for corporations. So just to use Home Depot as an example, as I mentioned, that wasn't just us sitting in a room, that was actually working with and listening to youth who've experienced homelessness in order to develop that initiative. So those are the three things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And Barbara had she well, by the way, I was going to mention what you're talking about. In the innovation world, we have a name for this. We call it innovation theater. When companies are putting on a bunch of show, look at us, what we're doing, when in reality there's no substance behind it. Well, that's the same thing as, impact washing. You look at us, look at what we're doing, when in the reality there's not a lot of substance behind it. And we see organizations play these games all the time, on the innovation side, on the CSR side. If you dig deep enough, you can figure out who's playing these games and who's serious. So, I'm sure you will. You probably have a list already. These are the real serious people. These are the game players.
And
Yeah.
and again,
Um,
like our view is, in order to derive value out of this stuff we're talking about, you got to be more than just window dressing, right? Because people are smart enough, they'll see through that, or people will take the
Yeah.
time. Like look at, the Gen Z population for whom social change matters a lot, and look at their
Hmm.
social media fluency. They're not
Hmm.
taking things at face value. They're actually going deep and then saying, okay, well, you know, what are these people doing? Is this performative? Is there something, is there real action here? If it isn't, they're not going to not just not be a consumer of that brand, they're going to actually call them out on social media.
Yes. Yes.
So it's a good
Absolutely.
reason to say, okay, well, you got to go further. Mhm.
Yeah, you got to be serious about this and can't play
Yeah.
games. Barbara said, she said, with innovation, can companies look at their long-term needs and also ask how they can help communities today? For example, there's a great need for more skilled people in the building trades and also a need for affordable housing. Could building material companies donate materials and train and hire people to use those materials in creating affordable housing? Can the two needs come together in an innovative manner? Thoughts?
I would say 100%. I think there's so much there that can happen. There's all kinds of things that are happening. And, again, coming back to not to call it Home Depot again for doing a good job, but which is true. Like they have all kinds of programs they're doing in this space and working with innovative organizations who are getting number one, creating jobs for people, youth and others, to work in the building industry, getting people trained in the trades, which is a hugely growing
Yes.
area, and bringing innovation to the building industry. Also, there's another also great examples of people who are, I can't remember the name of them right now, but there are a number of amazing examples, and I've spoken to a few folks who are doing creating these sort of prefab or small houses, that are
Hmm.
amazing. And so they're much more sustainable. Some come with, solar they can operate off the grid. They're
Hmm.
very data driven. They're creating employment in communities where there was low employment because these things are being built there. So I think that's innovation, and it's creating more affordable housing.
Hmm.
So the answer is
Yeah,
yes.
it just seems to me like when the business leaders sit down and stop and sit down and think. How can we leverage what we have to bring solutions? I think the innovations just come. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think the innovations don't come when they're being too lazy to put forth the effort to sit down and think about it. But if they sit down and think about, what are some causes that matter to us in our ecosystem, and then how can we use our capabilities and resources? I think the innovations will come. That's my sense.
Yeah, I do too.
It, it requires.
And tap into, and really, as we were saying before, and really go deep to understand these issues. Because it's like anything,
Hmm.
I can tell you, there has been never been a time that we haven't done things like I was talking about with Home Depot or engaged, people who are experiencing the problems that these brands are trying to address, that we haven't gotten groups of people like that together, listen to them, let them share their ideas about what can be done differently, that there haven't been just amazing ideas about that would never have
Hmm.
happened otherwise, and
Hmm.
it's like this is sort of funny, but it's ridiculous too. Like if you have a company and you have a serious legal problem, what do?
Hmm.
You're going to find the best possible, most experienced lawyer to help you with this problem because it's really, really important. And you are not a
Yeah.
lawyer.
Yeah.
At the same
Right.
time, many companies will say, "Oh, well, we're going to, create some campaign about, transgender people," to use that example, uh, without ever doing the same thing, which is speaking with people in that community to actually understand what that even means, how to communicate that, how you might get that community involved, or whatever, So
Hmm.
they'll just say, well, we'll just decide that ourselves. We don't know anything about that, but we'll figure it out. I don't think
Hmm.
that's the right thing to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, like getting all the stakeholders involved is important. And it's also a great way to, like I said, bringing you mentioned, I think bringing in different parties, just like employees and so forth, to really help you think about this, and bringing in all the stakeholders to help you think about these. What can we do? What solutions can we pursue? Rather than just trying to decide these things, secluded off in a boardroom in ivory tower somewhere, you're going to have a lot more impact. For example, I used to work at Johnson Controls and their automotive division, and
Hmm.
we had opportunities to partner with our local parks and rec, and I led whole groups to go out and do volunteer work in the parks and rec on
Hmm.
trail maintenance and trail building and things like that. And I actually was very surprised, delightfully surprised at how many people rallied around this. That I'm just out there sort of shaking the bell, say, hey, let's get a group together and do this, and a very large number of people got involved. So I think it's a excellent way to get your workforce involved, and giving them the opportunity actually to be hands-on involved as part of the solution, and doing these. So there's just so many innovative and tremendous ways that you can get your workforce, your employees, involved in doing these things as well, and it becomes very intrinsically rewarding to them as well. So I think, why would you not do this?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, there's no downsides
uh,
to it. Exactly.
yeah,
And and you said that,
really.
the business case, for most companies does start with employees, and
Yeah, yeah,
and
I
so
think that's
yeah,
important.
yeah, we
Yeah.
were involved with an
So
amazing
let me
social.
ask you,
Sorry.
yeah, let me ask you this, probably my last major question here. So, and you might have alluded to this earlier, but I want to be explicit about it. What specific advice would you give to business organizations and their leaders who want to be more innovative in terms of social and environmental impact? What are the top three things that they should be doing differently?
Yeah, I think we mentioned some of them. Number one, I would say focus on outcomes more than inputs, so if you want to have a
Mm,
certain outcome, a certain change for the business and for a particular issue, you focus on that and then try and think what are the most efficient what is the most efficient use of our resources to create that outcome, is would be number one. Number two, related to
mm,
that, as I was saying, how do you actually get a real deep understanding of what that issue is and what those outcomes ought to be and what the program, the initiatives ought to be? Well, you do that by getting outside of your boardroom, understanding those issues firsthand, speaking with people who have direct experience of that, and really working backwards from that point of view. And that's also something that drives stories of that can contribute to communications as well. So I would also say that, as a way of thinking in terms of being seen to be genuine, authentic, and committed to issues, thinking about things that are will be seen maybe as not in your best interests, as a business. And coming
mm,
back to
mm,
Patagonia, like the classic thing is Patagonia saying, wait, before you buy any of our products or clothes, really consider if you actually need this. They're very clear about that.
mm,
They're saying, no, before you hit that button, really think about whether you actually need this. And that's like, okay, you know, they're not just about selling me stuff. They're actually about something different as well. They're that committed to it. Um, um, and the other thing I think, I think connect. If you do all those things, it gives you a place to communicate in a way that is very powerful. So,
yeah,
like that story I was just saying about Patagonia, like people talk to each other about that kind of thing. Like it's that
absolutely.
powerful. And the stories of, like, what we believe is, when you develop things in the way I was talking about, the actual development of these kinds of programs for a corporation or a brand becomes a story in and of itself. Like, this is how
Yeah.
committed this company is, or this brand is, to doing this. We spoke to people that mattered. We listened to them. We're involving them in this. We're helping. We're asking them to tell us how effective our what we're doing in this area is. Well, that's an amazing story. That's something that someone who's a writer in a newspaper, or someone on some web channel will say, you know what, this is worth a webinar about to find out more about it.
Yeah, and I think you hit a very poignant point right here. If you can get your audience and your community sharing viral stories about you, it builds so much credibility. Here's an example I really like. I'm a member of REI, the co-op
Amazing.
for outdoor equipment. Rather than trying to maximize sales on Black Friday, they close and they have a campaign called Opt Outside. Like opt out, but opt outside. So
Okay.
rather than rather than selling you stuff on Black Friday when everyone else is pumping out the goods, we're actually going to close our stores and we want you to go outside and get outside, right? That sort of thing, like, well, yeah, you would it's counterintuitive almost. You think they can make a lot more money, they just sell on Black Friday, but actually it builds so much credibility and it drives these viral stories, and in the long run I think that just builds a strong customer base for these organizations.
100%. And all of what you just said
Yeah,
is why REI ended up in the on the Forbes, I think it's called the best brands for social impact. And it was just
yeah,
released in April, I think. Number one, REI.
yep,
you know,
absolutely,
because
yeah,
it's so
yeah,
good. I'm sure Patagonia is up there too.
yeah,
But
probably so.
that's worth, if anyone's interested in checking that out. I believe it's the Forbes best brands for social impact. You could check it out, and
Okay,
that's an interesting thing to see actually. And some honestly are there to me were surprising that they're there because I don't even know anything about what they're doing. But there are others there that are that are
yeah.
worth paying attention to.
So Barbara asked a similar question, and I think probably the answer might be somewhat self-evident, but let's unpack it a little bit. The question is, does being focused on quarterly profits versus long-term goals slow innovation? Do more of the big ideas have a longer time horizon than Wall Street usually likes? And so I guess I'd like you to answer that question from a sort of a CSR standpoint. Do a lot of the innovations necessarily have a long time horizon, or some of them quick wins?
I think it depends. I think there's some things that could be quick wins that are related to things like, you know, disasters, emergencies, and so on, which sadly, because of climate change, are
Mm,
happening more and more often. It could be things that are, but beyond stuff like that, things that need an immediate response, I would say mostly impact, social impact, it happens over a timeline which is much longer than the quarterly cycle of reporting now that has to happen.
yeah.
So I think that it's in the juxtaposition of the need for short-term reporting on profits versus longer-term social change outcomes is a tough one, right? But I think that's where you have to have leadership who believe that focusing on those longer term outcomes is ultimately going to contribute to the things that are harder to measure in the short term: reputation,
Mm-hmm.
competitive
Mm-hmm.
differentiation, loyalty, all those things that are, employee engagement, better recruitment, and so on. But this stuff is not, nor should be, a quick fix to a bump in quarterly profits.
Yeah, I think that's my sense too. Is like a lot of these. I mean, social change doesn't happen overnight, right? Social change takes time to happen. So a lot of these are going to be inherently longer term initiatives to get behind, and so that's not going to just always show up in a quarterly result. It's gonna take a long term, but I think it is like you said, long term in terms of building the brand, building credibility behind the brand, building customer loyalty. In the long term, that maximizes things. In fact, this is one of the things we've learned in the innovation community over the last 20 years is that it used to be, that the only thing that mattered was shareholder value, and it was quarterly. And then there began to be this shift to like, wait a minute, there's other stakeholders that matter. There's customers, there's employees, there's community. And particularly like in a couple of icons I like to point to that have focused on different ones. Jeff Bezos has focused on customers relentlessly.
Hmm.
Richard Branson has focused on employees relentlessly. I think both have valid points. But the real point is when they have shifted away from shareholders to customers and employees, it's actually benefited the shareholders more in the long run. They actually drove tremendous more value in the organization than when they were focused on just shareholders. So it actually long term it has so much more impact.
Yeah, and there's a friend of mine I talk to a lot, whose his name is Faraz Khan. He runs this incredible organization called Spectreco, which is a data-driven thing about ESG. It's an amazing organization, and he always talks about the difference between focusing on shareholders and the value of focusing on stakeholders. And which is
Hmm.
really what you've said here. And I think that's 100% right, which is that, if you focus on just on shareholders today, it's actually the riskier thing to do because that's actually
Absolutely.
compromising your longer term value as a business.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're kind of approaching the top of the hour here and our wrap up. So, Paul, any last final thoughts or comments you want to share with our audience as we wrap it up and begin to finish things up? Any final thoughts?
Well, I just, one thing that maybe we didn't mention, which comes to mind also as well as part of the recipe, is if people aren't aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, and surprisingly, some people aren't, but it's worth having a look at that. 17 UN
Mhm.
prioritized Sustainable Development Goals that are a helpful starting point to building the stuff around. And the other thing is that like sometimes I feel like we come across as being like it's all very serious, like heavy. And it doesn't mean you can't be doing this work in a way which is actually, like there's a place for fun and humor and creativity and so on. And that just makes it even better too. It's not to trivialize
Yeah.
things, but not to forget that that's important too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially when you get to some of the topics, people get very tense and uptight. So I think it's a valid point. Like let's keep the lighter side and some humor involved in the process, and try to work through the whole thing. So I guess with that, I appreciate that insight. And Paul, I very much appreciate your diverse perspectives from so much experience with different client organizations around the world and working with so many large organizations on really defining the purpose and rooting that in values, and then finding or figuring out innovative ways that they can go engage their workers and engage their communities to really drive more and more innovation for the cause of social impact. So, thank you again so much for being our guest today and sharing those wonderful insights with us.
Well, you're welcome. And anyone can buy this book, Change for Good.
Yes.
So that's available on Amazon and lots of other outlets. And people, if they're interested, can look at our website, impactcorp.com. That's impact with a K, IMPAKTCORP.com.
Okay, very good. And so I would encourage anyone who's interested to reach out to Paul and learn more and check out the book. The book is a very good read, and I think you'll get a lot out of that. So with that, I want to thank you, Paul, and thank everyone here who was with us today. I appreciate your time. And with that, we'll call it a wrap, and I appreciate everyone's participation and wish you a great rest of your day. And we'll see you around the next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Anthony.
All right, goodbye.